Thanks everyone for coming tonight. I'm Rhonda Bathurst. I'm the Executive Director of the Museum of Ontario Archaeology. And we appreciate you spending a bit of time with us tonight as we tell you about some of the exciting new things that we're doing at the museum. So I'd like to start tonight with a land acknowledgement. We're at the Museum of Ontario Archaeology, and all who come here to learn and to work meet on this land that has been ancestral Indigenous territory since time immemorial. And today, descendants include people of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Lenape nations, as well as many Indigenous people who call this place and community their home. Well, we're all here as treaty people thanks to the 1796 London Township and Sombre treaties and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant. At the Museum of Ontario Archaeology, we do hold and care for archaeological collections and material heritage that has come from many First Nations territories in what is now called Ontario. We hold these collections as Ontario Public Repository in trust of its people and seek to work collaboratively and care, access, and decision-making and learning from this vital heritage record. So thank you again, everyone, for being here today. So this is the second or third stage really of a process we've been underway now for a while. So the museum started a strategic planning process last year. We've gone through some business planning as well. And we are having a grand vision of the museum over the next few years of working towards a complete and total revitalization of the galleries, the outdoor spaces, the programming. That's a lot of work. And to get us grounded in that work, we needed a framework. So this is where the interpretive plan comes in. This provides us a framework on which to build a new design and to re-envision what the museum is going to be in the years to come. So you can see that we've mapped out this planning before COVID, a little ambitious planning before COVID. It'll delay us a little bit in our planning. Some of the funding sources that we rely on are not quite the same, but we still intend to go forward. So after we complete our interpretive plan, which is going to wrap up in January, we'll be moving on to a design and feasibility stage over the next year or so that will lead us towards working up a capital campaign in which we hope to then re-envision the entire museum. We will be anticipating that public will be contributing to these plans as well. So please anticipate more surveys along the lines that you see for this particular phase coming up in the next few weeks and months and years to come. So I wanted to thank everyone who's coming here to participate today. In order to have a little bit of incentive for participating, if you are not an employee or a relative of mine, you are eligible to participate in a draw that we're going to be having. So we're going to support 3 local Indigenous businesses. At LOSA, Family Healing Services is going to provide us with a $100 gift certificate. Spirit Earth Holistics is going to provide us with a $100 gift basket. And Marjorie Henhock usually hosts our moccasin making workshops. We'll make a custom pair of moccasins for one of these lucky winners. So we'll have 3 draws after January 3rd. We'll extend the survey time for people to be filling out surveys until January 3rd. At that time, we'll do a draw. So if you're interested in participating in the draw, please send us an email with your email information. That's info@archaeologymuseum.ca, and we'll make sure that you're added to that. Or please fill out the survey and add your email there. So I wanted to first acknowledge the Ontario Trillium Foundation for the funding that has allowed us to go through this process. And I would like to very much thank Lord Cultural Resources, who are represented here today by Sarah and Brad. They have been an extremely wonderful help for us in guiding us through this interpretive planning process. And they're going to guide us through the rest of this presentation today. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Sarah and Brad. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rhonda. I want to echo Rhonda's welcome to everybody. We're really pleased that you could join us. And just to introduce myself, my name is Brad King, Vice President with Lord Cultural Resources, and we were privileged to work with the Museum of Ontario Archaeology on this plan that you're going to see today. The purpose of this is pretty basic. It's to get your feedback. We want to hear from you about what you're going to see at the new museum. We're going to present this interpretive master plan to you, and we're going to gather that feedback. Rhonda's already introduced the survey. If you haven't filled it out, please do. If you have filled it out, we will have more information at the end. Maybe you can pass it on to people you know and get them to fill it out, because we're interested in as much feedback as we can get. Let's go to the next slide where we talk a little bit about the project. And we're going to introduce what we're doing. What is an interpretive master plan? For those of you who don't know, is basically a written description of what visitors will see and do at the revitalized Museum of Ontario Archaeology. In this presentation, you won't see any concept renderings of pictures of what it might look at, because we're not at that stage yet. We wanted to ground truth it. We wanted to gather feedback on the plan prior to going to the design phase. That's why we're doing this now. So you can see there are a bunch of inputs into the plan. We have been working with the museum since about January this year. We've discussed what learning objectives, what were key themes, what should the nature of the visitor experience be, who our audiences would be, and then culminating in the descriptions of the exhibitions and what visitors would see, hear, and do at the museum. So that's a very brief description of what the contents of an interpretive master plan are. Again, essentially a written description of an exhibit by exhibit description of what happens in the museum. This is the planning process. The planning process is in a two-phase process. The first phase we went through in the winter and the spring. We started, as I say, last January 2020, a really long time ago, but that's when it was, and did the concept development phase and produced our first report in the spring. Phase 2 took place in the summer and the fall, when we actually took all the inputs, all the feedback, all the research and analysis in phase 1, and coalesced it into the interpretive master plan itself. And that is the product of which you're going to see here tonight. With that, I'm going to turn over to my colleague, Sarah Hill, who is going to be in control for the rest of the evening, and will introduce the draft concept and interpretive master plan, the exhibit plan. Take it away, Sarah.
Great, thanks, Brad. And as Brad mentioned, we're not at the design stage just yet. So a lot of what you'll see this evening is a written description, and I'm going to describe it for you. So it's a little bit more lively than just reading words on a page. But I wanted to start with the overall concept and where we got to. As Brad mentioned, part of our process had it was very collaborative. There was a lot of research that was involved. We did a number of different workshops with the staff, and we also did external consultations with various members from across the London regional and archaeology community. And part of our research, we really found that, when exploring archaeological museums across the world, many of them are object-driven. This is a very traditional approach. They tend to, as the kind of title suggests, they focus very much on the artifacts, those found objects, and try to use them to focus and describe what life was like for these specific cultures. It talks a lot about what we know. And from our discussions and workshops, it was really felt that, we wanted to take a different kind of approach, something that would be more contemporary and, a bit more relevant for the museum. And so the feedback came that we really wanted to look perhaps to focus more on the science of archaeology, the methods and practices that come along with archaeology, to talk about how we know what we know. And the other concept that we wanted to carry forward was an issues-driven concept. This is really based around more broader themes, in particular current issues, making sure that we could relate archaeology to today and some of those wider concepts that we're working on, things like climate change and diversity and inclusion. And so the exhibit plan or description that I'll present to you should be reflective of this type of approach. And as Brad mentioned, there's a number of different components that go into the interpretive master plan, and one of those key things are the key themes. And this really helps provide a structure for the story that the museum will tell to its visitors. And so you'll see in our approach going forward, there are really 4 key areas that make up the plan for the revitalized Museum of Ontario Archaeology. And now it's important to note that this experience starts with an orientation experience, but is really a self-directed experience, which means that there's no particular sequence or order in which you need to visit each of the exhibits in order to get the full story. You can move about, move from one exhibit to the next as, your interest, based on your interest or your time, and you can go back from one to the other. It's really up to you after that orientation experience. And so now I'll move forward into our little animation in which I will try to keep up and be able to describe for you the different experiences that a visitor to a revitalized Museum of Ontario Archaeology would to see, hear, and do while they're here. And so, as I mentioned, we start at the orientation area. When you arrive at the museum, you're welcomed. And in this orientation exhibit, it really introduces you to the world of archaeology in Ontario. And we look to answer questions like, what is archaeology and why do we do it? And so the key exhibits that make up this area, the first one is a welcome. And this will be a dynamic moving wall projection, including images and text that welcome you to the museum in a variety of different languages and really illustrate for you all that a visit to this museum has to offer, both inside and out. Next is Archaeo What? And so this is a dramatic large-scale artifact mural that creatively illustrates, using artifacts from the collection, the vast diversity of things that have been left behind from across Ontario and throughout time. And this is where we're able to provide you with a no-nonsense explanation about what archaeology is and why we do it. And then next, we'd look at exploring the types of archaeology. So using text and graphics, the two main types of archaeology we'd explore would be cultural resource management, or CRM, and university-based archaeology, which are the two predominant types of archaeology that are performed in Ontario today. And then the last exhibit in this area would be Busted Myths and Misconceptions. And so this is a fun interactive where visitors can review statements presented and determine whether they're true or false, and help us to try and debunk some archaeology myths. So then once you've completed your orientation experience, as I mentioned, you're free to move about the museum and explore as you like, but we've just kind of presented the remaining exhibits in this particular order. So the next is around doing archaeology. It really focuses on the how. So this is where visitors can explore Ontario's many archaeological sites, see how archaeological practice has changed over time, and then be a bit more interactive and actually try their own hand at a variety of different activities that archaeologists typically perform as part of their daily work. And so the exhibits in this area, the first is around archaeological sites in Ontario. And so this would be an interactive map that would help visitors to pinpoint where archaeology is happening across the province, so that everyone can see the full breadth of current and past excavations. And it really allows you to delve a little bit deeper into some of the key site discoveries, and then also to learn a little bit more about the Lawson site, which is of course an archaeological site here at the Museum of Ontario Archaeology. The next exhibit is the story of Ontario archaeology. And so as a 3D timeline of images and graphics, this gives visitors an overview of when and how archaeological practice has changed in the last 100 years. You'll get to know key milestones and innovations across the history of archaeology. And the last exhibit, and probably one of the more dynamic ones in this area, is our Archaeology and Action Learning Station. The Archaeology and Action Learning Station is an interactive learning station. And so here visitors can try their hand at a number of different activities. They can research site maps and dig reports using the digital flipbook. They can listen to Indigenous oral stories that really help to encourage a different way of knowing. They can test their observational skills, looking for hidden features in the landscape. They can dig for clues in the augmented reality sandbox, sort finds in discovery drawers, and use the high-tech lab equipment to analyze our slide samples and answer questions like, how old is it? And what did people eat? So then moving along, the next exhibit, or series of exhibits, are around the why of archaeology, or what we learned from the past. And so this really emphasizes that archaeologists are like detectives that piece together clues from the past and help visitors really get into the mindset of an archaeologist and put their problem-solving skills to the test. And so the first exhibit in this area is History Detectives. And so this is where visitors can learn how to interpret archaeological evidence, develop a hypothesis, experiment to prove their theories. It'll involve a lot of a variety of different puzzles and games that can be done individually or together, and will really just put people's deductive reasoning and logic skills to the test. It'll also allow us to consider some contested histories and really reflect on how our own personal experiences and biases might cloud our judgment and how we analyze things. And that then leads us on to the next exhibit, which is around seeing differently. And so here in this particular exhibit, we represent the Atawadaran Indian village diorama. And so this was originally created in 1930, but we're representing it in a way that encourages visitors to look differently and think about how our past biases might have influenced the interpretation of this particular scene and determine which assumptions might no longer be relevant. Then moving on is what does our stuff say about us? And so this is where visitors can consider a collection of commonplace items that are relevant to us in the 21st century, and then imagine the future, perhaps 100 years from now, and think about what an archaeologist from the future might think about us, and what do these objects say about us and life in Ontario in the 21st century. This one has the opportunity to be really dynamic too, especially given COVID. The last exhibit in this area is what do we keep, or why do we keep archaeological finds? And so this is a virtual tour of the museum's artifact repository and helps people to learn a little bit more about what goes on in the other part of the building. And so they can find out what type of things are kept there and why we preserve these archaeological finds for future generations. And then our last area is Archaeology and Me. And so it's important to recognize that archaeology isn't only about the past, it's very much about our present and our future, and that archaeology can help us learn more about ourselves and solve contemporary problems. So this area is really about making meaningful connection between archaeology and our everyday lives. And so in this area, we've got the exhibits around archaeology for today and archaeology for the future. And this allows visitors to explore archaeology's connection to today's most pressing topics. And so it'll be filled with graphics, text, mixed media, and props, as well as collections, artifacts, and encourage people to think and reflect on questions like, what can archaeology tell me about me? And what should be passed on to future generations? And it's also in this area that we'll continue MOA's really great temporary exhibition program, which would be a regularly changing program of temporary exhibitions, allowing more in-depth discussion of current issues in archaeology, other topical global themes, perhaps like climate change, and provide an additional focus for exciting research. And so then that brings us to the end of a visit at the Museum of Ontario Archaeology, and we hope you enjoyed yourself. So now we move along to our Q&A portion of the evening. And we encourage you to ask the burning questions that you have, either Rhonda or Ron Williamson, who's joined us, will be able to answer your questions, or perhaps Brad and I can answer some questions. And so to do this, we encourage you to use either the Q&A box or the chat function to ask your questions. Anyone? No questions. Come on, someone has to have a burning question. Oh, we've got a couple coming in. The first one is from Megan Brooks, and she says, regarding the archaeological sites part about doing archaeology, how will that work? So I think that is in reference to the interactive map. And she's reinforced that with a balanced site protection to prevent looting. Yes, that's definitely an important consideration, and is something that I think will be fledged out more deeply in the content development process. But it's certainly something that we understand is important to protect the sites, to prevent people from damaging the sites, from going on and looting the sites. And so I think it depends on the specificity of the map. I think Ontario is a very big place, and it's important that we're able to give, you know, generalities, but not maybe spell out specifically exact location. And then Elka Weinstein asks, what local Indigenous groups have you consulted about this plan so far?
So Elka, I can take some of that. So there have been no particular groups with COVID. The ability to meet with different communities was nil. We weren't able to actually get out to communities the way we'd originally anticipated. So we've really just been sending out inquiries to different Indigenous people that we know. So we've sent out the survey, for instance, to a list of people who we are connected with. We are really looking for ways to connect with different Indigenous communities. COVID's made it a little challenging, so we are more than happy to have the word spread about this. If you know of people or know of ways to pass this around, please feel free to do so. I can expand a little bit. We do have one of our board members is from Chippewas of the Thames. So we do have a community representation there, and we do have a lot of work that we've worked with a couple of folks from Oneida and the Thames and Chippewas of the Thames. So local communities are aware that this is going on, but we'd love to have this spread out far more broadly.
And I think too, that's a process that we'd like to see continue into the content development process, and is certainly a part of the principles and approaches that make up the interpretive master plan. This idea of multiple voices and multiple perspectives and shared authority. And so that will also be something that needs to be that process, and how those people are involved and how that information is reflected in the gallery will also be part of the content development and the design process. Any other questions?
So if you do have questions that you don't want to share, you don't feel like sharing with the rest of us here in this sort of format, please feel free to email me. I'm Rhonda, RHONDA, at archaeologymuseum.ca.
Oh, and one more question from Megan. Is there an avenue for live demonstrations of techniques?
It's a great question. Again, we've got a great outdoor space. And as those who are familiar with the museum know that right now we have a longhouse out there. It's at the end of its use life, unfortunately. We're going to have to find something else we can do there. One of the things that we think is a great way of communicating to the public is through demonstrations in that space. So yes, we do anticipate doing that. We'd love to see a lot more involvement with experimental archaeologists as well. So people that actually play around with how archaeology might actually look, put them on display too. So we've had some of that. We usually have some demonstrators that will come out during events that we've had, such as Powwow, and we'd love to see a little bit more of that.
Okay, we have one more question. It says, I am curious about the cultural focus of MOA going forward.
Yeah, so we're trying to broaden. Ontario archaeology has been fairly narrowly focused on Indigenous culture history for the past several decades now. So as archaeology has become more and more prominent within the province, there's more and more cultural input, and we want to make sure that we're capturing all those voices, so all descendant voices. So we have, for instance, a great chapter of Black history has happened right here around London, Ontario. Right part of Southern Ontario. So we want to make sure that we're involving more than just our voice. Archaeologists have one particular voice and one way of looking at things that we've been sharing. We want to see what other people think about the stuff that we've been finding. So we intend to broaden that perspective a lot more. We have over 10,000 years of history, human history here in the province, from earliest hunters that came in following caribou to people that were shopping at Sam the Record Man just a couple of decades ago. There's a lot that can be encompassed in archaeology, and we want to make sure we're capturing all of that.
Great. And then if there aren't any other questions, we do have one from Emily, which is great because it helps us segue to the next bit. And she says, where can we find the survey again? And so we just wanted to say this is one of the avenues for being able to present and answer any questions you may have. And as Rhonda suggested, you're more than welcome to email her if you have any questions that you'd like to ask. But we are asking people to give us a bit more feedback on what they've heard as part of our presentation and for what's on the museum's website. And so that is through the online survey. And so you can see the link here. We did set a date until December the 20th for closing, but I believe, Rhonda, you said that's extending. Mm-hmm. Is that right?
We'll extend that until January 3rd. So you can find it on our social media. If you follow us on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, we're sharing the link for the survey on there. So please make sure you fill that out, and yeah, you'll be entered in the draw. You add your email at the end, and you'll be entered in a draw for, if you came in a little late, for 3 different Indigenous businesses, 3 different Indigenous businesses around London will be providing us with some prizes.
Great. And then as participants, you should receive a follow-up email tomorrow, and that link should also be in that email. And please feel free to fill in the survey and also to share that link with other people. We want to get and capture as broadly as possible the different thoughts and opinions. And so with that, we'll just wrap up and say, where do we go from here? And that is to collect feedback from the public via the online survey and this process and any other questions and comments that come in. And we'll be reviewing those comments and working together as a group, both LORD and the Museum of Ontario Archaeology, to incorporate that feedback into the final Interpretive Master Plan. And then, as Rhonda said at the beginning of our webinar this evening, this is only the first stage in the process. And so we move forward to the content and design development stage. And so this Interpretive Master Plan then becomes that roadmap and helps us move forward. And there'll be other opportunities to gather more feedback as we move into that content and design development stage. And with that, that brings us to the end of our presentation today.
Thank you, everyone, for stopping by. And please, we want to hear what you have to say. We're very excited about this process. We want to make sure that we're being inclusive of your voices and your opinions, too. This is your museum, so please get in touch.